Alright, let's start the presentation. Thank you for attending my talk. I am Seunghun Han and very pleased to share my research at Black Hat USA. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about my new tool, Alcatraz, that prevents escapes from the KVM QEMU and KVM-based MicroVMs. I am a senior Git researcher at the affiliated institute of ETRI. I'm a review board member of Black Hat Asia and KimchiCon conference. I was a speaker at several conferences like Unix Security, Black Hat Asia and Europe, Hack-in-the-Box Security Conference, and more. Additionally, I'm a Debian Linux maintainer and have been taking care of packages related to CPU and advanced configuration and power interface. I have contributed several Linux kernel patches too. Goal of this talk is that I present escape paths of KVM, QEMU, and KVM-based MicroVMs. KVM-based hypervisors are widely used from VMs to containers, but KVM has higher privilege than the kernel, and the attacker can use it for escapes. So I made a new tool, Alcatraz, and introduced it to prevent escapes. It downgrades KVM's privilege to the guest hypervisor. It makes a sandbox for the KVM and monitors system calls to prevent escapes, such as unauthorized process creation, kernel code modification, and privilege escalation. Before the talk, I would like to tell you a short story related to this presentation and research. Once upon a time, there was a young security researcher. I said just young security researcher. That means he was not CEO or CTO and not even new CSO or managers. Yeah, he was just a young security researcher, so he was over there and just enjoyed his hacking life. In those days, all cloud platforms were based on virtual machine technology. However, DevOps and serverless architectures emerged, and the cloud platforms had to support new container-based technology. To meet these needs, Amazon, Microsoft, Google provided container services and serverless functions like Amazon Lambda, Azure Function, and Google Cloud Function. Wow, it seemed like a new era of cloud platform had come. So he thought the container would rule the platform soon. Wait a second, but how? Maybe we need to check virtual machine architecture and container architecture before we go further to his story. The left side is the virtual machine architecture. It has a hypervisor, and the hypervisor makes VMs. They have their own OS as well as guest OS. Applications run on it. In contrast, the container architecture only has supporting files and runtime for each container. Applications run on them with a shared Linux kernel. The differences are apparent. One thing is the isolation technique. The other is the execution environment. Let's see more details. VM architecture uses virtual machine monitor as well as a hypervisor. VM architecture provides strong isolation with the hypervisor. However, full operating system is needed and performance overhead is high. It also has its own execution environment such as kernel and user space. In contrast, container architecture uses namespace and cgroup features of Linux kernel. Container architecture provides weak isolation, so just supporting files are needed and performance overhead is low. It means that if an attacker has a kernel vulnerability, he or she can escape from the container and also subvert the host and other containers. Alright, let's go back to his story. Cloud vendors and researchers, including him, also knew the problem of container technology, but containers were indispensable and strong isolation was needed to prevent escapes. To overcome the problem, they mixed container technology and a hypervisor. Then, new things were born. They were containers but had a hypervisor. It meant they were some hybrid things. The young and poor security researcher was so confused, and even he didn't know how to call them correctly. He thought about it all day and night, and he finally found out that to be a container or not to be a container, that's not the question. The real question is, how can we prevent escapes? After that, he started his long and painful journey to find the answer. As you guess, the security researcher is me, and this is my exciting journey. This is content and background. Before explaining my new tool, Alcatraz, let's check the hybrid technology. The first one is Kata container. Kata container has a simple architecture. It uses VMs to make secure containers. It runs a container on the VM, so it has strong isolation and high performance overhead. Kata container can support various VMs such as QEMU, Amazon Firecracker, and Intel Cloud Hypervisor. The important point is that KVM is the core. Amazon's Firecracker is a new open source hypervisor specialized for serverless workloads and containers. It replaces QEMU and makes a new type VM called MicroVM. MicroVM has its own device model and has minimal setup, the customized kernel and load file system. As you see, Firecracker also leverages KVM. Google gvisors is an application kernel for containers. It limits the host kernel surface accessible to the application. gvisor's kernel sentry provides kernel services to the application, but it runs as a user process and has minimal setup, kernel, and file services. gvisor uses KVM to intercept system call requests of the application. As I mentioned before, all hybrid architectures leverage KVM, and this is the architecture. There are some strange points, like host kernel has ring 0 privilege. However, KVM has ring -1 privilege, and it means KVM has more power than the kernel, even though it is a kernel module. The more important point is KVM connects with VM software directly because of supporting VM services. But VMs can be subverted by attacker if they rent or purchase the VMs from the cloud vendors. So, I felt something suspicious. Yeah, totally something suspicious. The hybrid technology leverages KVM as a hypervisor to get strong isolation. However, KVM attaches VMs tightly and has ring -1 privilege. It means that the attacker can still escape from the VM with a KVM vulnerability and subvert the system. Fortunately, I was not the only one who was worried about the excessive privilege of a hypervisor. Yeah, there were some researchers and previous works that were already worried about it. These works are related to checking hypervisor integrity of or hypervisor malware, HyperSentry, HyperGuard, DevWatch, and HyperSec. And here are their core architectures. Because of the time limit, I should explain them briefly. HyperSentry used a system management mode of firmware and baseboard management controller to check the integrity of hypervisor because the attacker could subvert it. HyperGuard also used SMM to monitor the integrity of the hypervisor. DevOps was slightly different from others. It aimed to detect hypervisor-level malware and used an embedded controller and its firmware. However, it was worried about the excessive privilege of a hypervisor like others. HyperSec retrofitted KVM ARM to enhance the security of KVM. It aimed to reduce the attack surface of KVM ARM. As you know, firmware modification required special devices and signing keys. Hypervisor retrofit didn't need them, but I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So I realized that I had no friends like me. So I had to find a more practical solution. After considering various architectures and mechanisms, I finally got the solution. However, unlike others, I don't take a higher ground. Instead, I downgrade the KVM's privilege to a guest hypervisor and make Sandbox with my Pico hyperbox. Hyperbox protects host kernel and KVM. It also emulates virtual machine extensions or VMEx instructions of KVM. So escapes can be prevented like this. After getting the solution, I named it Alcatraz. The rocks and the sea mean hyperbox that prevents escapes. The prison means a sandbox that monitors KVM. Analysis of critical paths of escapes. Here are CVEs related to KVM and QEMU since 2013. There were more than 200, including code executions, privilege escalations, denial of services, and information leaks. But I filtered out those and information leaks because they were not related to escapes. I would like to explain them one by one for you. However, if then you might be confused. Unfortunately, I have not enough time for that. So I categorized CVEs into 4 parts. The first one is code execution with a KVM vulnerability. It executes code outside of a VM. Small shellcode is used for creating a root process of a host and escalating privileges. It is also possible to modify kernel or KVM code, but disabling security features are needed. The second one is code execution with a VM software vulnerability. It also executes code outside of a VM. A VM software has lots of code for services and hardware emulations, especially full-featured VMs like QEMU has a large code base. Others have smaller ones, but it doesn't mean vulnerability-free. Small shellcode is used for creating a user process of a host. The third one is privilege escalation with a KVM vulnerability. It elevates the privilege of a VM. A VM is a process and runs in the guest privilege of a host, but improper handling, such as page table interrupts and registers, give host privilege to the VM. It is possible to create a root process of a host and modify kernel code. The last one is local privilege escalation with a KVM and VM software vulnerability. It elevates the privilege of a local process. Some KVM vulnerabilities can be exploited through dev KVM and used for escalation. Some VM software vulnerabilities also can be used for privilege escalation if the VM or related daemons run in soft root privilege. But VM usually runs in user privilege for security reasons, as you know. For now, let's check the previous works and where they did focus. These are well-known researches, and they concentrate on VM software vulnerabilities. Maybe Several reasons for that. I guess VM software has a huge code base and user level are more familiar than the kernel level to research. It means we still have the chance to be like a speaker with KVM vulnerabilities. Alright, let's summarize 4 cases for escapes. KVM vulnerabilities can be used for code execution, VM to host privilege escalation, and local privilege escalation, right? And code execution can do VM to host process creation, host kernel code modification, and host user to root privilege escalation. VM to host privilege escalation also can do all 3 behaviors. Local privilege escalation only can do host user to root privilege escalation. In contrast, VM software vulnerability can be used for code execution and local privilege escalation. Code execution of the VM software vulnerability only can do process creation because it has a user privilege. Local privilege escalation is possible to do host privilege escalation. As you know, the left side is about vulnerability disclosure, so no one knows until the vulnerability is revealed, or you have to find it before somebody exploits it. However, the right side is a result or aim of this exploitation. Fortunately, it has apparent symptoms, and we can detect them with monitoring system calls. Yes, right. I got the answer finally. From now, I will show you how I design and implement the mechanisms. Design and implementation of Alcatraz. What is Alcatraz? Alcatraz is a practical hypervisor sandbox to prevent escapes. It doesn't need SMM and retrofits of the hypervisor. It downgrades KVM's privilege and makes a sandbox with Intel VT. Alcatraz consists of Hyperbox and tailored Linux kernel. Hyperbox is a peak hypervisor made from scratch and has core mechanisms for preventing escapes. Tailored Linux kernel has only one system core interface for x64 and narrows the attack surface and monitoring points. Hyperbox makes a sandbox with the memory and register protection technique. It leverages the extended page table or EPT of Intel VT. EPT translates guest physical address to host physical address and can prevent code and read-only data modifications. It also protects security-related feeds of control registers, such as write protect of CR0 and supervisor mode execution protection of CR4. Hyperbox monitors system calls and prevents unauthorized behaviors. It sets hardware breakpoints to the system call entry point, fork, exit, and create functions. It prevents unauthorized behaviors with them. Hyperbox emulates VMExits instructions for nested virtualization. It downgrades KVM's privilege to a guest hypervisor, so it has to emulate VMExits instructions of KVM because ring 0 cannot execute them. However, the matter is performance overhead. Hyperbox uses VT features to reduce performance overhead. It uses virtual machine control structure or VMCS shadowing. VMCS shadowing allows a guest hypervisor to execute the VMExits instruction directly. So emulations or interventions are reduced while nested virtualization. It also uses virtual process ID or VPID. VPID gives unique ID to virtual CPU and translation local site buffer or TLB. VPID prevents TLB flushes when VMExits occurs and reduces performance overhead. Whew. Wow. I know that the architecture of Alcatraz is so complicated and you may feel a little dizzy or confused. So I prepared additional slides for you, and they are full of diagrams, not the text. I hope you like it. Let's move on to the next page. This page shows how to prevent unauthorized code modification. EPT is the core of preventing unauthorized code modification. Hyperbox makes a sandbox for the kernel and the KVM with Intel VT technology. It means the kernel uses guest logical address and guest physical address, not the host address. And the guest physical pages are mapped linearly to the host physical pages with the EPT table. The important point is EPT table has its own access rights and the hypervisor protects them. So if an attacker changes the page table of the sandbox, he or she can infect code page 1 like this. However, EPT still has read-only and executable access rights, so the code modification attack is prevented. This page shows how to prevent unauthorized process creation. The stop marks are hardware breakpoints. In normal process creation, an application or VM calls for system call. Then VMExits occurs at the system call entry point because of the hardware breakpoint. Then Hyperbox handles the VMExit events and saves system call number with PID. It also checks if the privileges of kernel and Hyperbox are the same and resumes the system call process. The rinse kernel continues to execute the fork system call and VMExit events occurs again because of the hardware breakpoint. Hyperbox handles the event and it checks the system call number is fork. In this case, the system call was fork, so process information is created in Hyperbox and the kernel also creates a process. This page shows preventing unauthorized process creation. If the attacker tries to exploit with IO control, VMExits occurs and Hyperbox saves system call number IO control with PID. Then it checks the privileges and resumes the IO control system call. While processing IO control, the attacker hijacks the control flow and calls fork function to escape. When fork function is executed, VMExit occurs while by the hardware breakpoint, and Hyperbox checks the saved system call number. As you know, the system call number was IO control, not fork, so the escape is detected and prevented. This page also shows preventing unauthorized process creation, but in this case, I assume that the attacker detoured my checkpoints and created a malicious process successfully. But as you know, the system call is the air for applications, and there is no exception for malware. When the malware PID 1 or 2 calls socket or some other system calls, Hyperbox intercepts it through VMExit. Then it finds out that it doesn't have information about PID 1 or 2 because malware detoured the hardware breakpoint. So this case is also prevented. This is an additional page about preventing process creation. This page has only guide information, so please check it with my presentation file later. From now, I will show you how to prevent unauthorized privilege escalation. In normal case, an application or a VM calls CNUID or related system calls to change privilege. Then VMExit occurs and Hyperbox saves the system call number with PID, compares privileges, and resumes the system call. While processing CNUID, commit class function is called. VMExit occurs again. After that, Hyperbox checks if the system call number is privilege related, and it updates effective UID init and resumes. Then the suspended system core is resumed and updates effective UID. This is normal case and there is no abnormal behaviors. In this case, the attacker tries to exploit and escalate privilege. The attacker calls IO controller to exploit. Then VMExits occurs and Hyperbox saves IO controller with PID, compares privileges, and resumes the system core. While processing IO controller, the attacker hijacks the control flow and executes commit crash function or for privilege escalation. Then VMExits occur again and Hyperbox checks the saved system call number. The number was IO controller, not SendUID or related system calls, so the escape is prevented. As I mentioned before, my checkpoints can be detoured and the attacker can get root privilege successfully. However, Hyperbox has all process information and can detect and prevent it. When the malware PID 101 calls socket or some other system calls, Hyperbox handles it with VMExit. Then it checks privileges and finds the abnormal privilege escalation like this. From this page, I would like to show you a nested virtualization feature. Without Hyperbox, KVM can do anything related to VMs like creating VMCS blocks and executing VMX instructions and so on. So when KVM executes VMX on, the privilege of the kernel and KVM changes to ring-1. Then KVM executes VMX instructions to create VMCS connecting with VM1. When VMExits occurs from VM1, KVM handles it. Yeah, VM2 is the same. It's very simple and clear, right? The problem starts here. Hyperbox starts ahead of KVM and makes a sandbox with VMCS0 for the kernel and the KVM. From now, VMCS0 controls kernel and KVM, and the host machine works like a guest machine. Because of it, the privilege of KVM is also downgraded to ring 0, and KVM can't execute VMX instructions directly. When KVM executes VMX on, VMExits occurs and Hyperbox handles it instead. After resuming the sandbox, KVM executes VMX instructions to create VM1 and Hyperbox emulates all VMX instructions with VMExit. Then run VM1. VM2 is the same. The key point is that Hyperbox hooks VM host RIP and RSP to Hyperbox's ones. I'm going to tell you the reason on the next page. When VMExit occurs, the event is handled by Hyperbox because VM host RIP and RSP were hooked by it. Then Hyperbox retrieves original RSP and RIP from the data list and changes VMCS0's guest RIP and RSP. Finally, Hyperbox runs a sandbox with VMCS0 and KVM's VMExit handler handles the event of VM2. This is the reason why I hooked host RIP and RSP. As you know, the sandbox is made by Hyperbox. If VM2's VMExit events goes to KVM directly, the sandbox is unavailable. So all VMExits exits have to be handled the Hyperbox first, and then Hyperbox has to run the sandbox. But the mechanisms has a problem. That is performance overhead. Let's see what happened while VMX instructions are executed. Whenever VM KVM learns them, Hyperbox intercepts them, and TLB is flushed. And here is the burst period. To handle a VM, VM read and VM write are frequently needed. After that, a VM runs, and this flow is repeated until the VM shuts down. However, this overhead can be reduced by enabling VMCS shadowing and VPID features. After enabling them, there is no TLB flushing when VMExits occurs. And if VMCS link PTR is set like this, there is no burst period. And others are the same as previous. Wow, it's really amazing, right? The only differences are VPID value and VMCS link PTR value. They make Hyperbox more complicated, but it is worth using them. I implemented Alcatraz following the design. Hyperbox is a loadable kernel module, so it can be loaded anytime before you start VMs. Tailored Linux kernel is just a recompiled version, and I removed some options, so there is no system core interface for legacies. Evaluations and demo. For benchmarks, I prepared the server environment like this. This is a micro benchmark result. The values are normalized, and they are various from 1.27 to 8.21. It looks like performance overhead is so high, but it is natural because this is just a micro benchmark, and Hyperbox intercepts all system cores. Let's see the real-world benchmark. This result shows a kernel compile benchmark. The values are also normalized. Or Alcatraz, although Alcatraz has about 800% overhead in the micro benchmark, however, it has only 10% overhead in the kernel compilation benchmark. And in the case of a custom machine, it has only 1% overhead. So I can say it has reasonable overhead. All right, demo time. I prepared a short demo for you. The first case is an escape from a KVM vulnerability. The operating system is Ubuntu 20.4 and the kernel version is 5.8.18. Monitoring system logs. And starting a subverted VM. The attacker is trying to exploit, and backdoor is open. The attacker got loot like this. All right, let's start Alcatraz. And starting a subverted VM again. The attacker is trying to exploit, but Alcatraz prevented it. There is no response from the shell. The second case is an escape from a VM software vulnerability. Monitoring logs, starting a subverted VM. Attacker is trying to exploit. Backdoor is opened. The attacker got user privilege like this. Let's start Alcatraz. Starting the subverted VM again. The attacker is trying to exploit again, and then Alcatraz prevented it. There is no response. Yeah, like this. The last one is privilege escalation with a KVM vulnerability. Monitoring system logs. Starting a subverted VM. QEMU has a user level. But now, because of the exploit, QEMU has root. Let's start Alcatraz. Starting the subverted VM again. The attacker is trying to exploit. Then, yeah, Alcatraz prevented it, like this. Conclusion and black soundbite. Firstly, containers, VMs, and MicroVMs suffer from escapes. The hypervisor can provide strong isolation, but it has the excessive privilege and connects with VMs tightly. Secondly, taking a higher ground is not always the answer. The higher privilege we get, the more constraints we have. Lastly, Alcatraz is a practical hypervisor, Sandbox, to prevent escapes. It downgrades KVM's privilege and makes a sandbox. It also has reasonable overhead, so please try it. All right, this is the last page of my presentation. As you know, there was a skilled researcher, and nothing has changed except he became a speaker at Black Hat USA. Oh, I heard one thing, that he moved to another place near the CEO because he became a senior skilled researcher. Well, here are my press link and email address. So source code and demos are in the link. And if you have any questions, please contact me with them. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your precious time.